So Ben, you've had this struggle with your emotions to express them, either you struggling to express them at all, or you find yourself just vomiting emotion out constantly, right? Or you're probably finding the thing that most men experience is you oscillate between the two. You either like completely bunged up like a blocked nose, right? Or you're like some sort of wild spring that's like sprouting water constantly. And those things are your emotions. And you are wondering why do I oscillate between these places, right? And the damage it does to your relationships, to your work life. Maybe you're a bit explosive. Maybe it makes you feel shame. I'm going to take you through and explain why this happens and what you can do about it. So I call this two ends, right? Emotional repression and emotional incontinence, right? Because incontinence is a bit like, when you get old or you have some sort of bladder issue and it just leaks out constantly, right? So what happens is a lot of men exist in this place of emotional repression where we struggle to express our emotions. We have a lot of shame around expressing them. We think if we express our emotions, we're going to be weak, right? We're constantly kind of deactivating our emotional system, which is useful and is meant to emote, meant to have us express. I could think of these videos with Piers Morgan when he was debating someone about emotional mastery, and he was like, yeah, but women don't want a man that's crying all the time. And this is what kind of sits in this place of emotional repression where we think being emotional, expressing emotion, and we just swing over to the other side, which is the emotional incontinence, which I'll go through in a bit, and we feel tons of shame. So we try and stay on this opposite end that feels safe, right? Which is like we're trying to down-regulate any issue. We're kind of trying to dominate ourselves, right? Dominate our emotional selves, because there's a lack of trust. There's a lack of knowing how to express emotions without shame. And the shame doesn't come from the emotions themselves. The shame comes from the story we have, usually the story about being men, right? Ultimately, we are just like, I don't want to connect to emotions. I don't want to feel them because I don't want to experience the story we have about what emotions mean and what it's going to cause to our life. Maybe some point you express love or care or fear or sadness and someone dumped you, or you were rejected, or your parents told you to man up or something like that. Maybe you had conflict and it was difficult, right? So you are consciously and unconsciously repressing your emotions. So then we've got this other side, which is emotional incontinence, where it's just like you're over emoting, right? You're over-regulated. You're just like flooding, emotions just flooding through you. You've got a low tolerance to distress, or at least in moments you're experiencing this. It doesn't have to be all the time. In moments you're experiencing this, right? A low tolerance to distress. No containment of your feelings and emotions, right? Your emotions aren't processed. They just kind of flow out like a waterfall. I'm all for these water type analogies today, right? They're just flowing out of you constantly. And this could only be 5 minutes of your week you're doing this, right? In this very unprocessed way. And it's not to say that's bad, but sometimes what happens is we oscillate, as I said, right, between you two. So you're just kind of discharging emotion at people. You get this when you're a friend, you meet a friend or a partner, and they just vent at you. And you're like, well, I wasn't even ready for that. This can show up as like oversharing too early in dating, emotionally dumping, over-explaining, reactivity in communication. This is a really common one for us men. A conflict happens or something happens in our relationship and we just become reactive to the situation and we over-explain. Sometimes it can be anger, frustration, counterattacking. It's all this lack of containment, right? Sometimes it's just like, I'm just being honest and just like vomiting out everything without thinking about it, without processing it. And sometimes it shows up as like expressing things and late regretting them, right? It's this feeling we have is like, if I don't express this now, I won't be able to contain myself, or I might not get another opportunity to do this, right? And I see this come up with a lot of men who, as I said, they oscillate. They'll be repressed all the time and then they'll explode. And this oscillation occurs because of the repression, right? And because of the incontinence over here, because when you're constantly repressed emotionally, you are building up this tension in your system, in your mind. And then you blurt it all out and then you feel a huge amounts of shame, right? You feel weak. You feel shame, you feel there's something wrong with you, you feel emotions are bad. Maybe there's bad consequences of this sort of emoting. You say things you don't mean, you overshare, and then you feel shame because you think the other person's judging you. Like it can be all sorts of things. Maybe you tell someone you love them after 2 dates and it's too quick. And, or the reactive communication means that you attack your partner and they dump you. or you say something in under the guise of like, I'm just being honest, but actually it's really hurtful to your partner and who they are, and then they end the relationship. And as I said, these two things are completely linked, right? Because it can feel like what you have is a kind of communication issue, but really underneath it is a nervous system problem, right? It's around capacity and containment. It's around the capacity to hold emotion and contain it, and actually around the ability to be self-regulated and be able to feel what's there and express it. So what happens often for men is this pressure builds, and then the emotional outburst happens, then there's shame, and then you're back to repression again. And it's just this loop that happens inside of a relationship, right? And it can feel like there's something wrong with you. So I'm going to tell you what you need to do instead. What you have to do is kind of practice touching, expressing, regulating your emotions on a very regular basis, right? So that can be daily. And then if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, so you want me to like blurt out everything all the time? No, I said touch, become aware, regulate and express. So it might be that you're so used to being clammed up about everything, you don't know how to just respond when your partner says, hey, how are you feeling? And actually maybe you're feeling a bit uneasy about the relationship, and you sit there and go, well, I can't say that. She's going to think I'm weak. She's going to dump me. And then you hold on to it for 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months. And then it comes out in a quite hostile, blurting way out of nowhere. So what you want to do is touch and feel the emotion, like, oh yes, I'm feeling this. Where am I feeling this? Right? What is it that I need, right, to shift this, to feel maybe more connected, right? More stable. Maybe there's something you need to do. Maybe there's a conversation and go, hey, and a responsibility, right? This is the really important thing, is speaking with responsibility. Hey, I've noticed I've been feeling, a little bit disconnected, a little bit off in our relationship. I think this is because which is different from what usually happens when we get into this emotional kind of vomiting and incontinence, which is we blame. You're doing this thing and you're making this relationship shit. Yeah? It's an ownership of like, I'm feeling this due to this thing, my feeling, my emotion. I'm not blaming you. Yeah. And you might even, describe what's there, right? It's about creating an internal feedback loop, right, with yourself, so that you can accurately notice what's happening in your inner world and process it so you can deliver it to your partner in a way that they can listen to, or anyone in your life, right? Because this is a type of like, I don't know, like it's like a regulated containment, a middle ground where you have some emotional containment, but there's also expression in there. So like you can notice what you're feeling in your body, right? You can stay with it yourself. You don't have to discharge it immediately, right? But you also don't let it build up so it becomes untenable and uncomfortable. So you can express it and you can be with it and you can take responsibility for it. Now, it doesn't mean that you actually have to speak to a partner. If it's a relational thing, you have to speak to your partner about it. This is what men's groups are really great for, right? You can bring it to the men in your life if you have the sort of men that you can bring your emotional stuff to, right? I feel very lucky and blessed. I've got a lot of men in my life. I can say, yeah, this is going on in my life with my business or my relationship or my fatherhood. And I can just like bring it to them. I don't have to deliver all this stuff to also all of the time. But a lot of us don't have this, right? Which I'm going to talk a little bit about this, because you have to start rewriting your relationship to your emotions. Because if you always feel your emotions are bad, never be accepted, they're always going to be too much, you're always going to swing over to this repression place. And then it's going to become really, really intense and too much for you to handle. And then you're going to swing over to this kind of incontinence, right? And then you're going to feel the shame again because you exploded. You're just going to stay in this cycle and loop. Now, I'm not prescribing emotional repression here. And I'm not prescribing this kind of emotional incontinence of just blurting out everything all the time. There's a middle way. Yeah. A middle way where we have like a somatic experience of our feelings and emotions. We find safe places to express them. We able to frame them for the people we're expressing them to with a level of responsibility, even if that responsibility is to your friends, like, hey, I'm feeling something about a relationship and I just want to like express it to you, and it's not going to come out in the most beautiful way, but I just ask you to hear me. Yeah. Because you see, there's an awareness there. You're wrapping it around awareness. So there's something going on for me. It's a bit unprocessed. and I'm seeking some where I can bring this, right? You can even do that in your relationship, because to some degree, right, if you're doing it all the time, but you're at least preparing someone for what they might about to hear. Because what happens too often when I speak to is they let things just get into like a pressure cooker and they don't express them, and it all becomes too much for them. And then they explode. It becomes too much for their partner. It becomes too much for their friend. It becomes too much for their family. So the key here is growing in this nervous system capacity to hold, but also in your capacity to feel as well, right? To feel, because when you are able to be present with your feelings and emotions, you'll notice them, you'll be aware of them, but they won't overwhelm you, right, as much. And they won't shut you down. They won't flood you in the same way, because you'll be able to express and be there for people in your life. So what do? Let's just break it down really simply. You notice what you're feeling in the body. What am I feeling in my body? Somatic awareness. I'm feeling tension. I'm feeling some sensation. This heat, pressure, tingling, tightness. Yeah? Be with that feeling. Just sit there with it. Right? Just sit there with it. And then stay with it. Don't do anything with it. And then you can journal on it. You can write, what I'm feeling is da da da. And writing is really good, or speaking to someone. Just thinking often isn't enough. And it's like feeling and expressing, give it feeling words. Wow, I'm feeling a lot of stress around this situation. I'm feeling a lot of fear about this thing, right? You're taking responsibility. You. They're not making this thing happen to you. You're feeling this. And it makes such a difference when you're communicating that with anyone else, whether that's your partner, whether that is a friend, for them to take on this information. This is something we miss, which keeps us oscillating from side to side. So if you want to learn how to really grow your emotional capacity, your nervous system capacity, I have a program that I'm taking on new men in the beginning of April, which is called Relate. It's where we go through all the bits and pieces around this emotions, around this nervous system piece, around presence. We're diving into all the relational aspects that we are never taught as men, which is why your relationship constantly are a struggle for you, right? We're going to be diving deep into it and creating mastery around these areas. And if that's something you're interested in, there's a link down below to add yourself to the waitlist, and then someone in my team will get in contact with you. Ciao, ciao.